For 38 days, a cowboy cared for a mountain lion no one else would help. The leg was wrong from 20 yards out. I could see that much before I even got down off Cutter. It was the way the animal was holding itself, weight distributed too far back, haunches bunched under it like it was bracing for something that had already happened. A full-grown mountain lion, tawny and long, crouched at the base of a granite shelf where the creek bends near the upper pasture. The right foreleg angled out at a place legs don't angle. Compound, I figured, or close to it. The cat was watching me the way they watch everything, absolutely still, all of it stored behind the eyes. But it wasn't moving off, couldn't. I stood there a while. Long enough that Cutter got bored and dropped his head to nose at something in the grass. Long enough that I noticed the dried blood down the leg, rust brown in the morning light, and the way the cat's breathing was controlled, no panting, no high-pitched distress. Just steady, measured inhales. Like she'd already calculated what her options were and settled on the one that cost the least. Most men I've known would have gone back for the rifle. It's the sensible thing. A mountain lion with a busted leg, close to a working ranch. You don't let that solve itself slowly when you can solve it quick. I knew that. I've done it before with other animals in other years when I was younger and had less time to think about what I was doing. There's no cruelty in it. It's just the practical math of a working landscape. You don't let suffering run any longer than it has to. I don't know what stopped me that morning. Something in the way the cat held still. The patience of it, like it had already made its peace and was just waiting to see what the world was going to do. There was no performance in that animal, no bid for sympathy. She was just there, in her situation, as clear-eyed about it as you could ask anything to be. I thought about that for a minute. Cutter blew through his nose behind me. Then I went back to the barn and got the old wagon canvas and a pair of leather-work gloves that were not going to do a damn thing against what this animal could do to me if it decided to. I got a length of rope. I got the canvas sling I use for pulling calves. I found the cattle bandage wrap hanging on a nail behind the medicine cabinet, and I took 3 rolls of it. I did not get the rifle. That's how it started. My name is Dalt Greer. I was 51 years old that fall, which doesn't sound old until you've spent 30 years on your feet outdoors in the high country, and your knees start filing complaints in October and your shoulder. The one you pulled out of its socket helping bring in a bull in the spring of 2003, starts reminding you of itself every time the weather changes. I've been hired on at the Aldecoa spread 6 weeks before, a big lonesome piece of ground up in the northern Colorado range, close to 9,000 feet in places, the kind of land that eats equipment and humbles men who think they know cattle. The widow who ran it was named Corinne Aldecoa, and she had hired me by letter, which struck me as unusual, but wasn't the kind of thing I was in a position to question. I needed the work. The spread needed a hand who could do more than one thing. She'd told me in the letter, plain as anything. She didn't need conversation, she needed competence. She had 2 part-time men from town who came up twice a week for the heavy lifting, and she wanted someone who could handle the daily work and leave her be. I'd written back that suited me fine. I've never been a man who needed a lot of talking to get through a day. What she hadn't told me, and what I found out on my own across those first 6 weeks, was that she'd been running this place alone for 3 years since her husband fell off a haystack in a storm and broke his neck. Carl Aldecoa, the county records would tell you, though I never looked them up. 42 years old, which is too young for anything. Hardest working woman I'd encountered in a long life of working alongside hard people. She had the kind of energy that made you tired watching her, not in an unpleasant way, just in the way of recognizing someone who had decided suffering was not a language they were going to speak. She was up before the horses. She went in after dark. She did the things that needed doing, and she moved on to the next things, and she didn't narrate any of it. She also had no interest in me whatsoever. That was fine. I hadn't come looking for interest. I'd come because I needed wages, and because the mountains on the north wall of this valley looked like mountains worth working under, which is a small thing but not a nothing. I mention all this because you need to understand where I was that fall. 51 years old, 3 ranches in 8 years, each one a stepping stone to the next thing, which turned out to be more of the same thing in a different county with a different view from the bunkhouse window. A man who had been good at his work his whole life and had the particular kind of nothing to show for it that comes from being good at work that belongs to somebody else. No land, no family left close since my sister moved to Oregon in '98 and my mother went the year after. No one waiting anywhere. I'm not saying this to complain. I want to be clear about that. I did my job every day and I did it well and I knew how to live inside a day's work and find it sufficient. That's not nothing. That's a skill a lot of men never develop. But I'd been at it long enough to know the specific flavor of a life that doesn't accumulate, where every good thing you do is complete in itself and doesn't build toward anything, because there's no one to build it with and no ground that's yours to build it on. I'd stopped expecting the world to notice me some years back. Not bitterly. Not as a wound I was carrying around and showing people. Just as a fact I'd accommodated, the way you accommodate a fence that isn't quite plumb, you work around it. It doesn't ruin anything, it's just how it is. So when I found the mountain lion and did what I did, it wasn't because I thought anyone would care. It wasn't even really a decision in the deliberate sense. It was more like something in me recognized that animal's situation and understood it, and my hands just started doing what seemed like it needed doing. The first 3 days were the worst. I built a low pen in the far corner of the hay barn, away from the horses. Heavy gauge fencing, the kind you use for livestock, notched into the wall stud so it would hold against something that outweighed most dogs by 60 pounds. I laid the canvas on the deep straw. I put water in a flat pan and meat, venison from a deer, one of the town hands had brought up the week before, in pieces, close enough to the fence that something inside could reach it without much movement. Getting the cat in there was a process I am not going to describe in detail, partly because I'm not proud of some of the improvising involved, and partly because there were 2 moments during it where I was genuinely not sure I was going to have both hands at the end of the morning. What I will say is that the rope work was complicated. The canvas sling served a purpose I hadn't originally designed it for, and at one point I was flat on my back in the straw with nothing between me and those teeth, but about 18 inches, and whatever calculation the animal was making about whether I was worth spending energy on. She decided I wasn't. That was generous of her, all things considered. I got the leg immobilized and wrapped as best I could with what I had. The fracture was where I'd thought midshaft of the radius, maybe a hairline of the ulna too. Ugly, but not shattered. I splinted it with cottonwood slats cut to length and wrapped it in cattle bandage until it was firm and even. The cat lay absolutely still the whole time, watching me over her shoulder with those yellow eyes. I don't know if that was trust or exhaustion or simply the calculation that resistance wasn't worth the cost. Probably all 3. When it was done, I backed off to the far end of the barn and sat against the wall and my hands were shaking a little, which I noted and then put aside. Corinne Aldecoa came into the barn on the second morning. I was changing the water pan and resetting the meat when I heard the door and looked up. She stood in the space between the main barn and the far corner, taking in what she was seeing: the pen, the canvas, the mountain lion, me crouched at the fence with a bucket. She stood there for a long time without saying anything. The cat watched her. I watched the cat. Then she said, "What in God's name?" "Found it up by the North Creek bend," I said. "Compound fracture near as I can tell. Thought I'd see if I could do anything with it." More silence. The kind that isn't empty, the kind that's working through something. "That animal will kill you," she said. "Maybe," I said. "Not today, though. She's too hurt to do it properly, and I think she knows I know that. And I think she's decided I know that she knows." I heard how that sounded. Anyway, I got the leg wrapped. She's eating a little. I'll keep her away from the horses. This corner hardly gets used. She, Corin said. Female, 3-4 years old. Had a litter recently, near as I can tell, but they're grown enough to be on their own. I kept my eyes on the water pan. She's alone up here. Corin stood there another moment. I didn't look at her. Then I heard her footsteps cross back toward the main door and the door and quiet. She didn't say don't. I'd expected don't. The next morning when I came into the barn, there was a chunk of venison on the corner post just inside the door. She hadn't mentioned leaving it. She didn't mention it the next morning either, or the one after that. But it was there every day. I carried that around with me for most of the day when I first noticed it, and then I set it down somewhere and went about my work. It wasn't a large thing, just a piece of venison on a fence post. But I'd been at this ranch 6 weeks, and the woman who ran it had spoken maybe 40 words to me in that time. And now she was setting out meat for the animal I was keeping in her barn without being asked, and without making anything of it. That was a kind of attention. And attention from a person who doesn't waste it on things she doesn't mean is worth something. Day 5, the cat ate for the first time with me in the barn. I'd been leaving the meat and backing off completely, coming in twice a day to check the water, move the food closer if she hadn't touched it, and then either staying or going depending on what the animal seemed to want. I'd started talking. Not at her exactly. Just talking. The way you talk in a barn at night when there's nothing around but the dark and the sound of horses breathing, and the small shifting noises a building makes when the temperature drops. Not conversation with information in it. Just voice. Just sound at a level that said, "This is what I sound like, you've heard it before, nothing bad has happened yet." Day 5 I came in just after first light and the meat from the night before was gone. The cat was lying flat on the canvas with her bad leg stretched out in front of her, the splint still intact, still watching me, always watching, but something in the set of her body had changed, a degree or two less coil to it, the way a spring releases just enough tension to stop being a spring. I put fresh meat down close to the fence. Then I sat on the upturned bucket I'd set 20 feet away and I watched her smell the meat, consider it in whatever way mountain lions consider things, and eat, methodical, no hurry. She paused once and looked at me and then went back to eating, which I took as a development worth noting. I sat there for about an hour after she finished, not doing anything useful, just being a presence in that barn that wasn't a threat. That's the whole work of it in the early days. You're not doing anything to the animal, you're doing something to the accumulated record it has of you. Every time you're there and nothing bad follows, the record shifts. It takes as long as it takes, and rushing it costs you everything you've built. When I came out, Corin was crossing the yard with a feed bucket. She stopped when she saw me come out of the far corner. "She ate," I said. Corin looked at me a moment. Something moved across her face that I couldn't name. Then she went on with the feed bucket. They ate. I want to say something about what the barn was like in those early weeks, because it was different from any barn I'd been in before, and I've been in a lot of barns. It was a working barn, old, the kind built before there was a standard design for such things, low in one section, tall in another where the hayloft had been raised at some point in the past 30 years, the wood of the uprights dark from decades of lantern smoke and animal heat. Tack on the west wall, organized and well kept, each piece in its place. The smell of it was hay and horse, and the particular dusty sweetness of old wood that has absorbed years of labor. Nothing fancy, just a barn that had been used hard and maintained with care. With the lion in the far corner, it had acquired a different quality, especially at night. The horses had adapted to her presence faster than I'd expected horses know when a predator can't come for them, and by day 3 they were back to their ordinary selves, though they still didn't like facing that direction. But the barn as a whole had a different atmosphere, a weight to it. Like the addition of one wild thing changed what the space was, the way one word can change the meaning of a sentence. I spent more hours in that barn in those 38 days than I've spent in any single place in years. In the evenings especially, after supper, sitting on the bucket. I don't know how to explain what that time was like other than to say it was some of the most concentrated quiet I've experienced. Not peace exactly. There's nothing peaceful about sitting within reach of a mountain lion, even a hurt one, but a quality of presence that didn't allow for distraction. You couldn't be anywhere else while you were in that barn at night. The cat required your full attention even when nothing was happening, and there's something about being fully in the place you are that I'd lost somewhere along the way and hadn't known I'd lost it. Corinne commented on it once, that I looked more settled than when I'd arrived. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said probably the altitude was agreeing with me, which was partly true, and she gave me a look that said she knew it was only partly true and she'd let me have it. There was a rhythm to those 38 days that I can't fully account for, the way you can't account for the rhythm of a season. It arrives, you're in it, and by the time you understand what it was, it's already behind you. Mornings I was in the barn early. Cutter got fed and turned out, the other horses settled, the lion got her water changed and her meat brought and her bandage checked every third day. The leg was setting. I couldn't be certain without a vet and proper equipment, but the swelling came down steadily, and there was no sign of infection, which was the thing I'd feared most. The rest of the day was ordinary ranch work, fence line in the north section that kept going to hell where the elk came through heavy, a spring pump that needed rebuilding, cutting wood and stacking it before the weather turned. Corinne worked alongside me maybe a third of the time. Not because she couldn't manage alone, she ran that place from the roof to the root cellar, and she knew every inch of it the way you know something you fought for, but because some work goes faster with two, and she was practical enough not to be proud about it. We didn't talk much, but we worked well together. She'd hand me the right wrench without being asked for it. I'd move out of her way at the right moment. That's a thing that develops the physical grammar of working alongside someone, and I noticed we'd found it somewhere in the first 2 weeks without either of us marking it. Around the third week, I started noticing other things. The way she moved through a task, precise and economical, nothing wasted. The way she'd stop sometimes in the middle of stacking hay or running wire and look at the mountains to the west for 30 seconds and then go right back to the work, like checking in on something and being satisfied with the report. The way she drank her morning coffee at the kitchen window, looking at nothing particular, just looking out. Not sad about it. Just present in it, the way a person is present in a long familiar thing. I noticed those things the way you notice the texture of land you're working, not meaning to, not making a catalog, just absorbing. I was also aware of being watched myself. Not staring, nothing uncomfortable, but Corinne Aldecoa had eyes that didn't miss much, and she developed a habit of observing me at the lion's pen when she thought I wasn't aware of it. I'd catch her in the periphery sometimes, standing just back from the open barn door, watching me work. Watching the way I approached the fence, the way I talked, the way I sat on the bucket and just stayed there without needing the staying to be anything in particular. I never commented, she never acknowledged it, we kept that arrangement. I understood what it was. She was making up her mind about something, and I'd been around that process enough times with horses to know you don't rush it, and you don't pretend it isn't happening. On about day 12, Corinne started sitting with me in the barn in the evenings. Not every evening. Every few days, irregular. She'd bring 2 cups of coffee and set one on the fence post outside the pen, and we'd sit her on an old milking stool she'd dragged in from somewhere, me on my bucket, and we'd watch the cat. Sometimes we talked about the work or the cattle or what the forecast was doing. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, and the silence was the kind that has weight to it, a comfortable weight, the kind you don't want to break with noise just to fill the space. Those evenings are what I think about most when I think about that fall. She asked good questions when she asked them. Specific, practical, showing she'd been thinking about whatever she was asking about before she asked it. Not casual inquiry, real wanting to know. and she'd sit with an answer after you gave it, turn it over, which is something most people don't do. Most people are already forming their next thought while you're still in yours. Corinne listened like she had time for it. On day 17, she sat with me long enough that the lamp was the only light in the barn and the cold had settled into the walls, and we didn't talk at all for probably 40 minutes. When she got up to go in, she paused at the door. "You're good with her," she said, meaning the cat. "She does most of the work," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "That's an interesting way to see it," she said. Then she went in. I stayed with the cat a while longer. The lamp burned low. I thought about what she'd said and what I'd said, and whether we'd been talking entirely about the lion. Day 19. I changed the splint material for the third time. The bone was setting, visible in the way the cat moved the leg now, tentative at first, then more deliberate, testing what it would bear. The swelling was almost gone. I'd extended the pen 4 feet because she'd begun pacing back and forth along the south wall, and while pacing is not comfortable to watch, it's a good sign. It means the animal's energy is back, means it's thinking past the immediate fact of the injury. That evening, Corinne came in with 2 cups and sat down on her stool and looked at the lion for a long time. "She's going to make it," she said. "I think so. Another 3 weeks before I'd consider opening the gate, then she needs somewhere to start putting that leg under real load, away from everything." "There's a canyon on the north side of the upper pasture," Corinne said. "Deep scrub, spring-fed water. No cattle up there this time of year." "That'd be ideal." The cat paced the south wall once, and then settled on her canvas and looked at both of us. "Carl would have told you to shoot it," Corinne said, not bitterly, just information. "He was a practical man, good man but practical. Livestock first." "Most people would say the same." "What made you not?" I thought about it before I answered, the way I think about most things before I answer. "The way she was holding still," I said. "Not panicking, not performing. She'd already taken stock of what she was dealing with and she was just in it, waiting to see what was going to come." I paused. I recognized that particular kind of patience. Corinne looked at me, just for a second, direct and assessing, then back at the cat. "Yeah," she said quietly, "that'll do it." She picked up her cup. She went back to the house. I sat with the cat until the lamp burned low and the cold came through the walls, and I thought about what she'd said and what I'd said, and I was fairly sure we hadn't been talking only about the lion. I was fairly sure she knew that too. Day 26. She asked me to come look at the spring on the lower east pasture. She thought she'd found the source of the pump trouble, and she wanted a second set of eyes. We walked out there in the early afternoon, the sky doing that thing it does in the high country in late October, going absolutely clear and cold and blue, the light coming in at that low angle that makes everything look sharper than usual, edges particular, shadows long. She'd found it. A fracture in the casing 2 feet below grade, probably from a hard freeze 3 winters back. It had been leaking slowly long enough to compromise the whole collar, and with winter coming it would fail completely before January if we didn't address it. She walked me through what she'd found and what she thought the fix required, patient and thorough. She was right on both counts. I told her so. "Good catch," I said. I meant it. She'd saved herself a January emergency in one of the most unforgiving locations I'd ever worked, and she'd spotted it before it became one. She didn't shrug it off, didn't deflect. She looked at me and said thank you in the plain way you say it when you mean it. We started back across the pasture. "Where were you before here?" she asked, after we'd gone 100 yards or so. "Montrose County mostly, some time in Wyoming before that." "Why'd you leave Montrose?" "They sold." "And before Wyoming?" "New Mexico, before that the Bitterroot for 3 years." She walked beside me without speaking for a while. "That's a lot of other people's land," she said. "Yes, it is." "Does that bother you?" "It did for a while," I said. Then it just became what it was. I looked at the mountains. A man can do good work on land that isn't his. The work is still real. It is, she said, agreeing specifically, not just being agreeable. But there's something different about work that goes into something that will still be there tomorrow, something of yours. There is a difference, I said. I've thought about that difference a fair amount. She nodded. We walked. Carl and I had this place 16 years, she said. Before that, I was a long way from this country. It took me about 5 years here before it felt like mine, and now I can't imagine ground I'd rather be responsible for. She looked at the high ground north. But I understand what it is to be in a place that doesn't belong to you yet, waiting to find out if it will. I thought about that word, yet filed it away. We walked the rest of the way back in quiet that wasn't uncomfortable. That's the thing I keep trying to convey about those days, the quality of the silences between us. I'd spent most of my working life in silences that were either empty or pointed with something unpleasant, and this was neither. It was just two people walking across pasture in October light, each of them knowing the other was there. Day 30. I should have been at supper, but the north fence had given me trouble I hadn't anticipated, and I was out past dark working by lantern light to get the wire right. When I finally got into the barn to check on the cat, Corinne was already there. She'd brought a plate of food with the coffee, biscuits, and salt pork from supper, the biscuits wrapped in cloth to hold the warmth, because she'd seen the light still moving on the north fence line and known. She set the plate on my bucket without comment. She sat down on her stool across the pen. I ate. The cat watched us both. I talked to my son today, she said. He's in Fort Collins. He wants me to sell. What do you want? I want him to stop worrying about me. She looked at the lion. He's not wrong that it's solitary out here. He's wrong about what that means. What does he think it means? He thinks being alone up here is a problem, a condition that needs correcting. She picked up her coffee. I think it's just the shape of the work. You can work alone and be fine. It's different from being lonely. It is different, I said. They feel different too when you're in them. She looked at me. You know, lonely, she said, not a question. I've known it, I said. Less than some people would think, more than I'd like. She nodded. The bank man came up in the spring, she said. Thought I should lease the grazing rights and let the ground sit. My son thinks the same. The town hands are good men, but they treat me like I'm managing rather than running. She looked at the cat. I've had a lot of people in 3 years tell me what this situation looks like from the outside. A pause. I haven't had anyone who just worked beside me, like it was ordinary. It is ordinary, I said. Not to me, she said. Not lately. Neither of us spoke for a while. The lamp burned. Outside, the wind came down off the high ground and moved along the roof. For what it's worth, I said, you run this place better than most men I've worked for. She looked at me for a long moment. That's worth something, she said. That's worth quite a bit, actually. Day 33. I found a gray wolf track in the snow near the barn wall. Big animal, fresh print, the oval pad and the 4 claw marks distinct in the new powder, close enough to the barn to be a concern. I spent 2 days reinforcing the pen without announcing what I was doing, adding a second layer of fencing on the outer face, resetting the gate hardware with heavier stock, running chain across the bottom where the original fence had enough play that something strong and determined might work it. I did it in the ordinary course of barn work. The cat was agitated those 2 days. She could smell the wolf, old fear doing its work on her from some place deeper than thought. And I spent longer in the evenings sitting on the bucket, talking low until she settled back to the canvas. When everything was secure, I told Corinne. Showed her the track, told her what I'd done and why. She looked at the track. She put her boot beside it for the size comparison. She looked at the reinforced pen through the barn door. Then she looked at me with an expression I recognized from the barn in recent weeks, that assessing, arriving at something. Look, you didn't say anything until you'd handled it, she said. Figured that was the right call. Why? Because you didn't need the worry before there was something to do about it, I said. And after there was something to do about it, I did it. She stood in the snow looking at me. The expression on her face was the kind that only lives on someone who has been paying close attention to a thing for a long time and has just arrived at a conclusion about it. She didn't say anything. She walked back to the house. That evening she brought whiskey with the coffee and poured a measure into each cup without asking, and we sat with the cat, and neither of us said much, and it was the kind of quiet that has accumulated in it, something that's been building for weeks and has finally come to rest. Day 37. I decided the cat was ready. Maybe one more day. She was putting full weight on the leg, the pacing had gone purposeful rather than anxious, and she'd stopped tracking me with that defensive intensity from the early days. When I came in, she'd acknowledge me, look up, orient her ears, place me in the room, and then go back to whatever she was doing. That's where you want to be with a wild thing you've had in captivity. Not bonded, at peace with each other's presence. That's the most you can get to, and it's more than it sounds. I was in the barn late, checking the gate hardware one more time, making sure the pin would lift clean, the hinges were clear. The night had gone fully cold, that high country cold that comes down off the peaks like water and pools in every low place and gets into the walls. The lamp going, the cat on her canvas. Corinne came in. No coffee this time. She came and stood at the fence and looked at the lion. You're going to let her go tomorrow, she said. Day after probably, one more day. And then you'll have fixed the thing you came to fix. Something in how she said it made me set down what I was holding. I came to work the ranch, I said. I know, she turned and looked at me. The lamplight was the only light and her face in it was plain and unguarded, the efficiency stripped away, just the person underneath. I just want to know if you're planning to leave. After. Have I given you any reason to think I want to? No, she said clearly. That's why I'm asking, because you haven't and I want to know if I should expect it anyway in spite of that. I looked at her in the lamplight. I've watched you for 37 days, she said. With that animal, with the horses, the fence line, the pump, every piece of broken or failing or difficult thing on this property. And I haven't, she stopped, started again. Men have worked this ranch. Good men, most of them, but they worked it like a job. Like they were trading their hours for wages and the work itself was just the medium of the exchange. She looked at me steadily. You work like the thing itself matters, like it's worth doing right whether anyone sees it or not. And I've been, another pause shorter, I've been watching someone work like that for 37 days and I didn't want to let it go unnamed. I didn't move. I've been alone 3 years, she said. I told myself that was fine and mostly it was, but I'm less sure about it than I was 6 weeks ago, and I didn't want to be someone who let that go unsaid. She crossed the distance between us, deliberate, not fast, and she put both her hands flat against my chest the way you put your hands on something solid you need to feel is still there. I put my hand over hers. We stood like that for a while, neither of us speaking, the lamp burning down a little, the mountains outside the same as always, the same as ever, patient with everything. I'm not going anywhere, I said, not unless you ask me to. I'm not asking, she said. Day 30th. I opened the gate in the early morning before Corinne was up, propped it wide and stepped back and sat on the bucket and waited. The cat didn't move for a long time. She stood at the open gate and looked at it and looked at me and looked at the gate again, testing the air, reading whatever a cat reads in it. Wild things know that openings can be traps. You have to give them time to figure out that this one isn't. Then she walked through. Slow, unhurried. That right foreleg with just the faintest hitch to its motion, less than I'd feared, more than I'd hoped, but it would do what she needed it to do. She crossed the barn floor to the main door I'd left open to the gray morning, and she went out, and she crossed the yard at a walk, and she didn't look back. Corinne was on the porch. She'd gotten up anyway. I came out of the barn and we both looked north, where the cat had gone. In the direction of the upper pasture, the canyon beyond it, the scrub and the spring-fed water and the deep country that had no cattle in it. "She'll be all right up there?" Corinne asked. "I think so. I think she's been ready for close to a week. She was just waiting until she was sure." Corinne turned and looked at me. Something in her face settled. The way something settles when you've been holding it in reserve and have decided you don't need to anymore. "Come have breakfast," she said. We sat at the kitchen table. She made eggs and fried potatoes, and there was good coffee, and the window showed the mountains going from gray to rose to gold as the sun came over the eastern ridge. We talked about the pump repair, the materials we'd need when to make the run to town. We talked about the north fence and whether the weak posts needed to come out before the ground froze. Ordinary work. The ordinary forward shape of a day. At some point she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Just that, a second or two, and then back to her coffee. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I understood what it was. The same thing it had been in the barn the night before, said now in daylight at a kitchen table over an ordinary breakfast. The confirmation of a thing decided. I was here. She was glad. That was the whole of it. I want to say something about patience, because it's the thing I know best, and the thing I'm least able to explain to people who haven't had cause to learn it. People confuse patience with waiting. They're not the same. Waiting is passive. It's just time going by while you have no other option. Patience is a choice you make over and over in the same situation, every minute for as long as the situation requires. It's active work. A horse doesn't get gentle because you waited near it. It gets gentle because every time you were in that pen you chose, deliberately, to be something it could trust. You make that choice again each time. You never get to stop making it. I'd been patient with animals my whole life. With land, with weather, with the slow accumulation of years on a body that got up and worked anyway. I'd been patient with work that went unnoticed, with days that didn't seem to add up, with the particular loneliness of being competent in situations where no one with any stake in the outcome was paying attention to the quality of what you were doing. What I hadn't done in a long time was be patient with a person, with the slow, real work of showing up the same way, day after day, until someone could be sure of you. Not because I didn't know how, but because at some point I'd stopped believing it was going to lead anywhere. And so I'd kept that particular kind of patience for the horses and the land, and let the kind that involves people go to seed from disuse. 38 days with a mountain lion reminded me what it felt like. And it turned out that the muscles for it were still there, atrophied maybe, but not gone. You use something long enough, then stop, and it doesn't disappear. It waits. The specific thing I mean is this. Around day 20, I realized I had stopped calculating. When you're around a wild animal that could hurt you, there's an ongoing calculus running in the background. Where is it? How is it positioned? What would I do if it moved? Defense planning at the edge of consciousness. I'd been running that calculus for the first 2 weeks, and somewhere around day 20, I noticed it had stopped, not because the cat was safe, but because I trusted the situation enough that I didn't need to watch it that closely. We'd reached something. I noticed, around the same time, that I'd stopped doing the same calculus around Corinne. The one that runs when you're on someone else's ground and you're aware of your position, careful not to take up more space than you're given. That one had been running since I arrived, not anxious, just calibrated, the way a professional on someone else's property stays calibrated. And somewhere around day 20, it had stopped running too. I don't know if she noticed. I think she did. I think she has the same kind of attention that notices that shift in an animal or a person and registers what it means. Not the romance of it, There's nothing romantic about sitting on a bucket in a cold barn at 10 at night talking to a large wild animal that could open your face without much effort. But the real texture of it, the daily discipline of showing up the same way, the moment when something shifts, the moment when you realize the shift happened some time ago and you missed exactly when, because you were in the present and not watching for the turn. The good things come that way. You don't usually see them arrive. You just find yourself inside them one morning and you look back and can't quite locate the threshold you crossed. Winter came early that year. By the first week of November, there was a solid foot of snow on the high ground and the work shifted, checking stock twice a day, keeping water from freezing, hauling hay on the sledge, burning wood faster than you could get ahead of it. The two-town hands stopped coming when the road went bad. Some weeks it was just Corin and me and the horses and the cattle and the mountains, and the work that the season required. I didn't mind. I'd been in more isolated situations in my working life, but there was something different in it now. Someone to come back to at the end of the day. Someone who'd been in the same day, who knew without asking what it had been like out there. Someone who asked, sometimes over supper, how a specific thing had gone, not making conversation, actually wanting to know. I hadn't understood how long I'd been without that until I had it again. In mid-December, I caught a track in the fresh snow near the upper pasture fence. Long stride, heavy paws, that flat single-pad pattern of a large cat on the move. I knelt and measured it with my hand, stood and looked north toward the canyon scrub, and then went on with what I was doing. That evening I told Corin, said I thought the cat was still working the upper range, that she was making it through. Corin looked at me across the table. "Of course she is," she said, like it had never really been in question. There's a moment from about 3 weeks into winter that I keep coming back to. We'd had a bad storm, 2 days of it, ice riding on the snow, everything locked in, visibility 50 yards at the worst of it. When it broke, I went out before dawn to check the herd. Cutter moved through the crust with that long-suffering patience horses get in hard weather, each foot placed carefully, no complaint. I was out close to 2 hours. When I rode back in, Corin was at the kitchen window. I saw her through the glass from the yard. She didn't see me see her. She was looking in the direction I'd ridden out, and the expression on her face was one I'd seen there before, in the barn, in other moments. The look of someone who has discovered they have a stake in an outcome they didn't expect to have, and is still getting used to what that means. I put Cutter up and went inside, and she handed me coffee, and I stood next to her at the window, and we looked out at the white pasture and the dark tree line and the peaks going silver in the morning sun, and neither of us said anything, and neither of us needed to. Let me go back a little, to something I skipped over because I wasn't sure how to say it, and I'm still not sure, but I'll try. Around day 22 or 23, it was a Tuesday, I remember that, because Tuesday was when one of the town hands came up, and we spent the morning getting the hay sledge runner straightened after a hard run over iced ground. Corin came into the barn in the evening, and she didn't bring coffee. She just came and stood outside the pen and looked at the cat, and after a while she said, without turning to look at me, "Carl was a good man." I waited. "He was a good man, and I loved him, and I miss him," she said. "And I've spent 3 years feeling like any thought I had that moved past that was somehow a betrayal." She paused. "It's not. I know it's not, but knowing something and feeling it are different processes." "They are," I said. "I'm not telling you this because I want you to say something," she said. "I'm telling you because I've been carrying it, and I need to put it somewhere that isn't just inside my own head." "All right," I said. "That's all," she said. She stood there another minute. The cat looked at her, she looked at the cat, then she went back to the house. I stayed where I was for a long time after that, not thinking about anything particular, just present in the barn with the animal and the cold and the lamp and the sound of horses breathing in the far stalls. Corin had given me something, not an invitation, not a signal, just the truth of where she was, and the truth of where she was asked for nothing from me except to hold it alongside her, which I could do. I was good at holding things alongside. That's its own kind of trust when you think about it. Telling someone the true shape of where you are, the complicated part, not the simplified version, and trusting them not to do anything clumsy with it. I just held it. Day 28. We had a bad morning. One of the young steers got through the north fence, and we spent 3 hours getting him back, cold and muddy, and testing each other's patience by the end of it. Not angry, just worn. That specific worn that comes from cold, wet work when things don't go the way they should. After we got the steer back and the fence repaired and ourselves more or less dried out, Corinne made a pot of coffee, and I sat at the kitchen table for the first time since I'd been at the ranch. She hadn't asked me in before, and I hadn't come uninvited. I'd eaten my meals in the bunkhouse or the barn. That's how hired hands live on someone else's land, and I'd never questioned it. She set a cup in front of me and sat down across the table without making anything of it, and we didn't talk for a while, just drank. "You've been here 6 weeks, she said eventually. "About that. And I've been treating you like a hired hand." "I'm a hired hand," I said. "You are," she agreed, "but there are hired hands and there are—" She stopped. "When Carl was alive there were always men around. He was easy with people in a way I'm not. He'd have you in for coffee the first week." She looked at her cup. "I'm not easy with people, I know that. I've always been better with the work than around the work." "I've noticed," I said, not unkindly. She looked up at me. "Does it bother you?" "No," I said honestly. "I'm the same way. I'm better at the doing than the rest of it, the explaining it, the talking around it." I thought about it. "I think that's why this—" I stopped, not sure what this was. "Yeah," she said quietly, like she knew what I'd meant even without the word. We drank our coffee. The kitchen was warm. Outside the wind was working on the fence line and failing, which was fine because I'd fixed that fence right the first time and I knew it. She got up to refill the cups, and when she set mine back down, she didn't move away immediately. She stood beside me for a moment, just stood there close, and then she went back to her side of the table. That was all, but it was something. I felt it like a change in the air pressure, the way you feel weather coming, something shifting toward something. After that she told me to come in for coffee in the mornings. Said it made more sense than having me trudging to the bunkhouse for it in the dark. Practical, the way she made everything practical. I thanked her and didn't say anything else about it. And the next morning I was at the kitchen table at 5:30 with my cup, and she was at the window with hers, and neither of us made anything of it because it was what it was now and didn't need commentary. Day 35. 2 days before I opened the gate. I want to tell you about that day because it's one I keep turning over. We'd gone to town for the pump parts and spent most of the afternoon on the drive, which meant being in the truck together for close to 3 hours each way. 6 hours in a vehicle with someone you've been learning in increments on a large piece of ground. Close quarters is what I mean, more personal than the work. She drove. Corinne drove her own truck the way she did everything, purposeful, light on the wheel, no extra motion. She knew the road better than I did, every switchback and the places where the verge got soft in wet weather and the long straight miles of high plateau where you could open it up. We talked. More than we usually did. Not because there was more to say, but because the road gives you something to look at that isn't each other, and that frees people up sometimes. She told me about where she'd come from, Iowa, a farming family, 5 brothers, and she was the only daughter, and had learned early that you either kept up or got left behind, so she kept up. She'd come west at 23 with a man she didn't marry, and when that ended, she stayed because the country suited her. Met Carl in Steamboat Springs at a stock auction in 1987, married him 2 years later. She told it all plainly, without nostalgia and without bitterness, the way you tell the history of a life when you've made your peace with the parts that didn't go right. I told her about the Bitterroot years, about a particular horse I'd trained there, a gray gelding with one black stocking who had the disposition of a very tired saint, patient with everything, forgiving of everything, but tired. You could feel the tired in him even when he was willing. I'd worked with him for almost a year, and when I left I missed him more than I'd missed most people. I hadn't talked about that horse to anyone. He just came out when I was on that road in that truck with that woman. She asked about him, specific questions, what the work had been, what the breakthrough moment had been, what it had felt like to leave. She listened to the answers. When we got back, it was after dark, and we unloaded the truck by lantern light, and she made sandwiches instead of a proper supper, because neither of us had the energy for it. And we ate standing at the kitchen counter the way you eat when you're tired and the day has been long. She handed me a sandwich and our hands touched for a second, just the brief contact of passing something, and she didn't pull away from it, just stayed there a beat longer than necessary. Nothing dramatic, nothing declared, just two people standing in a kitchen in the dark mountains, eating sandwiches after a long day, and the particular warmth of being in the same room as someone who has been listening to you. I went out to check on the cat before I turned in. She was pacing again, the nighttime pacing which had become her rhythm. I sat on the bucket. I didn't talk, just was there. She paced, and the lamp guttered in a draught, and I thought about the gray gelding and about the road through the high plateau and about a woman who asked specific questions and listened to the answers. I thought, I am in a place that is starting to feel like it might belong to me. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just held it. That's more or less all of it. 38 days in. One cat with a fixed leg somewhere in a North Canyon. One ranch that still needs everything working ranches always need. And me at a kitchen window in December with coffee going warm in my hands. I said earlier that I'd stopped expecting the world to notice me. That's still true, mostly. I don't think that changes. You live long enough in a certain way, and the accommodation becomes part of the structure. But here's what I didn't account for. That sometimes the world notices you anyway, without being asked, because someone in it has eyes and uses them. That's sometimes a good woman, a woman with her own strength and her own work and her own losses and her own clear-eyed way of being in the world, looks at what you are and decides it's worth looking at. Not because you performed for her, not because you tried to be noticed. Because you were just doing the thing in front of you as well as you knew how, and she was watching and she saw it. That's a thing that can happen at 51. I didn't know that. I know it now. The pump is fixed. The north fence will hold. The cat is in the canyon as far as I can tell. The work tomorrow will be the same as the work today, hard, cold, necessary, particular. And when I come in from it, Corinne will be here, or she'll be coming in too, and we'll be in the same room at the end of the same day. That's the whole of it. That's the entire thing. I'll take it. I thought about the mountain lion the day I found her, the stillness, the patience, the way she'd assessed her situation and settled in to wait and see what the world was going to offer without panic, without giving up, without any performance about it. The way she'd slowly, on her own terms, come to trust the thing that kept coming back. I'm 51 years old. I've worked other men's land for 30 years and been good at it and found it sufficient. I thought sufficient was what was available to me. Made my peace with that, the way you make peace with a fence that'll never be quite plumb. I'm standing at a kitchen window in Colorado in December with coffee going warm in my hands and Corinne Aldecoa standing close beside me, and she's looking at the same mountains I am. And this is the same ground we'll go back out into after breakfast and work through whatever the day has in it. She sees me. That's the thing. All of it, the work and the patience and the quiet and what I am when I'm just doing what I do without thinking anyone's watching. She's been paying attention this whole time and she's seen the whole of it and she hasn't looked away. I don't have a sermon about what that means at 51. I'm not a man for sermons. All I can tell you is there's a different quality to the light on a morning when someone is glad you came in from the cold. When the work of the day is work, you're doing alongside someone who sees the value of how you do it. When the ground under your feet might, for the first time in 30 years, actually be ground you're staying on. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.